The year was 1804, and the United States, still a young nation, had recently made one of the most significant land acquisitions in history, the Louisiana Purchase. President Thomas Jefferson, with a stroke of diplomacy, had doubled the size of the country. But this vast, newly acquired territory was a mystery. What resources lay hidden in its wilderness? What civilizations and cultures thrived in lands that most Americans had never seen? To uncover the answers, Jefferson turned to two men, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Their mission? To explore the Western territories, establish relations with the indigenous tribes, and, most ambitiously, to find the elusive Northwest Passage, a water route to the Pacific that could open up new trade opportunities. On May 14, 1804, the Lewis and Clark expedition, also known as the Corps of Discovery, began its journey into the unknown. The team, comprising about 45 men, left from St. Louis, Missouri, traveling upstream along the Missouri River. Soldiers, interpreters, hunters, and even a Newfoundland dog named Seaman joined the ranks, handpicked for their survival skills and toughness. These men would need every ounce of their resilience for what lay ahead. From the start, the Missouri River tested the Corps. It was unpredictable, with sandbars, swirling currents, and sudden changes in depth. Navigation was no simple task, and at times the men were forced to tow the boats manually, pulling them along the riverbank in the sweltering summer heat. The work was backbreaking with the constant threat of capsizing, but the crew pressed on. For many of these men, this was the farthest they had ever traveled from home. As they moved further west, the landscape changed, and the eastern woodlands gave way to vast open prairies. Wildlife abounded, with deer, beavers, and buffalo spotted regularly. Every bend in the river brought the potential for new discoveries, and with each discovery came both excitement and uncertainty. The expedition's encounters with Native American tribes began early on. In late August 1804, near present-day Nebraska, they met with the Oto and Missouri tribes. These meetings were diplomatic by design. Jefferson had emphasized the importance of establishing peaceful relations, and Lewis and Clark came prepared with gifts, beads, mirrors, and medals bearing the likeness of Jefferson. For the indigenous people, the sight of these white men who spoke of a distant Great Father in Washington must have been strange. Nevertheless, the early encounters were respectful, with both sides exchanging pleasantries and gifts. But not all meetings were peaceful. In September, the expedition met the Teton Sioux, a powerful and warlike tribe. The Teton Sioux, suspicious of the Corps, saw them as potential invaders of their territory. The tension mounted quickly. At one point, it appeared that violence was imminent as both sides prepared for a fight. It was only through careful diplomacy and the distribution of yet more gifts that the situation was diffused, allowing the Corps to continue their journey. As the summer of 1804 turned into fall, the expedition entered the Great Plains. The landscape was unlike anything most of them had ever seen. Vast and flat, the plains stretched to the horizon, a seemingly endless sea of grass. Herds of buffalo, elk, and antelope roamed freely, providing both wonder and sustenance for the Corps. The men hunted regularly, shooting game to supplement their rations. Buffalo was a staple. Its meat was dried and smoked to make jerky, which could be stored for long periods. But even with plentiful food, the work was exhausting. Every day consisted of rowing or hauling boats upstream, setting up camp and preparing meals. The men slept under the stars, often with only a buffalo hide for warmth. The vastness of the plains was matched only by its harshness. The winds blew incessantly, and by November the weather grew bitterly cold. It was clear that the Corps would need to find a place to hunker down for the winter. In late 1804, they reached the villages of the Mandan and Hidatsa tribes near present-day North Dakota. These farming tribes had established permanent settlements along the Missouri River, and Lewis and Clark decided that this would be the place to spend the winter. The Corps built Fort Mandan, a crude but sturdy shelter that would protect them from the biting cold. The winter of 1804 to 1805 was harsh, with temperatures regularly dipping well below freezing. Yet it was also a time of learning and diplomacy. The Mandan and Hidatsa tribes, who had long thrived in this region, shared their knowledge of the land, the weather, and the best routes westward. The relationship between the tribes and the Corps was mostly peaceful, though not without its moments of tension. One of the most important relationships formed that winter was with a young Shoshone woman named Sacagawea. Captured by an enemy tribe as a child, Sacagawea had been living among the Hidatsa and was now married to a French-Canadian trapper named Toussaint Charbonneau. When the Corps of Discovery resumed its journey in the spring of 1805, Sacagawea and Charbonneau joined the expedition. Sacagawea would prove to be an invaluable member of the team. She not only served as an interpreter, helping the Corps communicate with the many tribes they would meet, but her knowledge of the land and her calm demeanor in times of crisis helped the expedition navigate through some of its most difficult challenges. In April, after 5 long months at Fort Mandan, the Corps of Discovery set out once again, this time heading into even more unknown territory. The landscape continued to change as the men moved westward. Gone were the flat plains, in their place were rolling hills, rugged cliffs, and swift rivers. The Missouri River, which had been the Corps' guide for so long, became more treacherous the farther they traveled. Rapids, strong currents, and rocky terrain slowed their progress, and the threat of accidents was ever present. Yet the men pressed on, driven by the promise of new discoveries. One of the most significant obstacles they faced came in June 1805 when they reached the Great Falls of the Missouri. This was no small waterfall. It was a series of 5 massive cascades stretching over 12 miles. The sight was both awe-inspiring and daunting. There was no way to navigate the falls by boat, so the Corps had to portage, carry their boats and supplies overland. The portage around the falls took nearly a month and was one of the most grueling parts of the journey. The men struggled over rocky, uneven terrain, battling exhaustion, blisters, and scorching summer heat. Yet despite the difficulties, they succeeded. By late July, they had successfully bypassed the Great Falls and were ready to continue their journey toward the mountains. The Rocky Mountains loomed on the horizon, a towering barrier that separated the Missouri River basin from the Pacific watershed. The men knew that crossing these mountains would be the greatest challenge yet. The trails were narrow and steep, and the weather was unpredictable. It was here, in the shadow of the Rockies, that Sacagawea's presence truly proved invaluable. As the Corps approached the mountains, she recognized the land as the territory of her people, the Shoshone. She had been taken from these lands as a child, and now, years later, she was returning. The expedition's encounter with the Shoshone tribe was nothing short of miraculous. In a stroke of extraordinary luck, the chief of the Shoshone turned out to be Sacagawea's brother, Kameawait. This familial connection ensured that the Shoshone were willing to help the Corps, providing them with the horses they desperately needed to cross the Rockies. Without these horses, the expedition would likely have failed. The journey through the mountains was harrowing. The men faced snow-covered passes, freezing temperatures, and a scarcity of food. For days at a time, they survived on little more than roots and berries. Their horses, too, suffered from the lack of grass, and some were lost to the elements. It was a test of endurance, and many of the men were on the verge of collapse. But they pushed on, knowing that the Pacific lay on the other side of the mountains. By mid-September, the Corps emerged from the mountains, battered but not broken. Ahead of them lay the Columbia River, a winding path that would take them to their ultimate goal, the Pacific Ocean. The descent along the Columbia River was no less dangerous than the climb through the Rockies. Rapids threatened to destroy their boats, and the ever-present hunger gnawed at their resolve. Yet the landscape was breathtaking. Dense forests lined the riverbanks, and the towering peaks of the Cascades framed their journey. Along the way, they encountered the Nez Perce, a tribe that welcomed the expedition warmly. The Nez Perce provided food, guidance, and even helped repair the Corps' battered boats. By November, after a year and a half of travel, the expedition finally reached its goal. The Pacific Ocean stretched out before them, a vast expanse of water that marked the western edge of the continent. It was a moment of triumph for the Corps of Discovery, but it was tempered by the realization that their journey was far from over. The winter of 1805 to 1806 was spent at Fort Clatsop, a crude shelter near the coast. It was a difficult time marked by cold, rain, and hunger. The men traded with local tribes for food, but their rations were meager and morale was low. Nevertheless, the men kept busy repairing their equipment, preparing maps, and gathering information for the return journey. In March 1806, the Corps of Discovery began the long trek home. The return journey was faster as they now knew the terrain and had established relationships with the tribes along the way. However, the dangers were still present. The expedition once again crossed the Rocky Mountains, battled the rapids of the Columbia and Missouri rivers, and faced the constant threat of hunger and exhaustion. On September 23, 1806, the Corps of Discovery returned to St. Louis. They had been gone for 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days. In that time, they had traveled over 8,000 miles, mapped vast new territories, and established diplomatic relations with more than 24 Native American tribes. But the impact of their journey was far greater than just miles traveled. They had cataloged hundreds of new plant and animal species, provided detailed maps of the Western territories, and gathered valuable information that would shape the future of American expansion. Lewis and Clark's expedition opened the door to the West, laying the foundation for America's growth as a continental power. For Lewis and Clark, the expedition marked the pinnacle of their careers, though their post-expedition lives took different paths. Meriwether Lewis struggled with depression and personal demons, dying under mysterious circumstances in 1809. William Clark, by contrast, went on to have a long and successful career in public service, including as governor of the Missouri Territory. Today, the impact of Lewis and Clark's journey endures. Their expedition is remembered as one of the greatest explorations in American history, an embodiment of the spirit of adventure, survival, and discovery that defined the early United States. Though they never found the fabled Northwest Passage, they uncovered valuable insights about the land and the diverse peoples that would influence the nation's future. If you found value in this video, support our work by subscribing and hitting the notification bell. With new videos coming out regularly, there's always something more to discover on Built by History.